The next item of business this afternoon is topical questions. Question number 1. Claudia Beamish. Could I ask those leaving the chamber to do so quietly, please? Question number 1. Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it will take in relation to the 4% increase in Scotland's carbon footprint between 2009 and 2010, as noted in its report, Scotland's Carbon Footprint 1998 to 2010.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
The latest Scottish greenhouse gas footprint figures show that Scotland is reducing its global emissions impact over the longer term. Between 1998, the first year for which data are published, and 2007, Scotland's carbon footprint increased by 15%. Since 2007, it has fallen just less than 19%. While the rise in emissions between 2009 and 2010 is disappointing, they should be seen in the context of a 19% fall in 2009 and the particularly cold weather in 2010, which led to increases in emissions from household heating. We know that these emissions fell substantially the following year, and we are therefore confident that we are on the right track. The Scottish Government is committed to working to reduce domestic emissions. We are cutting waste and using resources more efficiently. We have published our second report on proposals and policies for meeting our climate change targets, the Annex C of which shows that through the impact of existing policies alone, even in the absence of increased ambition by the EU, we would see emissions fall by more than the targets of Germany and Denmark. This includes impact of our new waste regulations that will help to reduce Scotland's global emissions footprint through greater prevention, reuse and recycling of materials, whilst also reducing Scotland's reliance on the world's limited supply of primary resources. In addition, the Greener Together campaign encourages people to lead more environmentally friendly lifestyles. Our low-carbon networks support a range of community and business networks to help promote low-carbon living, and the Climate Challenge Fund supports communities to reduce the emissions they generate through more efficient consumption of goods and services.
Claudia Beamish.
I thank the Minister for that detailed response. Time will indeed tell whether the 4% issue is a blip or the beginning of another trend in the wrong direction. As this is a global and Scotland-wide climate justice issue, as highlighted in Time for Reflection today, and considering the production levels have continually fallen since 1990 while consumption has risen, what is the Scottish Government doing to increase domestic production, especially in new technologies that will help drive forward our own low-carbon economy?
Minister.
Claudia Beamish raises an important point. Clearly, we are moving in the right direction on our domestic emissions produced within Scotland. But we do have a reduction, a small reduction, albeit in our carbon footprint, which does take account, as the member identifies, with imports and goods and services that we buy from overseas. We are doing work, as I say, through organisations like Zero Waste Scotland to try and improve efficiency support for all businesses and public bodies, to try and encourage them to look to reduce their own emissions. And we are leading sustainable procurement across the public sector. We are bringing new waste regulations that help reduce Scotland's global emissions footprint through greater prevention, reuse and recycling, as I say. There are a number of measures through the Climate Group as well, which is working with business community, larger businesses typically, to try and ensure that they are aware of the importance of reducing our carbon emissions and ensuring that they have access to all the information needed from government and other agencies to do so.
Claudia Beamish.
I thank the Minister for that answer. And could the Minister highlight specifically to give a bit more detail on my previous question about the increase in domestic production in relation to manufacturing of new technologies that will help us with a low-carbon economy? Because I'm aware of the highlighting of the issues around waste and around support for business, but it's very specifically that I'm looking at the manufacture of goods here rather than having to import, although of course I'm aware we still have to go on importing to some degree.
Minister.
That's a fair point. Apologies for not responding fully to it in the first question. We are looking at measures we can take as a society to move towards described as a more circular economy. Clearly, at the moment, a lot of recycled material leaves in a relatively low level of processing, goes abroad for use elsewhere. We have an opportunity as a society to develop the technology to exploit the recycled material that we generate as a country through our zero waste strategy, to make sure that is used, processed, added value to within Scotland to generate jobs, and also to ensure that those resources, natural resources that are obviously in process form and they're being recycled, are not wasted. And it's clearly something that my colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Environment, is keen to explore and to develop further.
Supplementary, Jamie McGregor.
Thank you. The figures suggest in percentage terms that household heating emissions are the same in 2010 as they were in 1998. What's the Minister's response to this, and will he redouble efforts to boost home insulation throughout the country?
Minister. Clearly, Jamie McGregor points correctly to one of the key drivers of the figures in 2010. In terms of the domestic heating figures that are quoted, we're aware roughly about 1 million tonnes of CO2 out of the increase was caused by domestic heating, and therefore it's a key issue for us in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. The member, I'm sure, is aware that we are, in combination with the funding that the Scottish Government is putting in, but also the Green Deal funding, we're looking to step up the level of investment in domestic energy efficiency measures to a total of about £200 million per annum. And that hopefully will mark a step change in terms of improving the energy efficiency of domestic heating in Scotland. And I hope that is something that will be welcomed by the member.
Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. The Minister began by saying that Scotland is reducing its footprint in the longer term. Perhaps it would have been more accurate to say Scotland has been reducing its footprint over the long term, and we don't yet know, as Claudia Beamish says, whether that trend is continuing or has been reversed. If the Minister doesn't share my concern about that question, will he at least accept that what this figure indicates is that the very last thing we need is economic policies designed to create a consumer-led recovery, and rather that we need a great deal of focus on issues like repair and reuse, which is activity that doesn't show up in retail and GDP figures?
Minister.
I certainly agree with Patrick Harvey. We need to do more to try and make use of recycled and reused materials that are generated within Scotland. Clearly, the move towards a more circular economy will help focus our minds on what the opportunity is for Scotland to enhance the areas of activity we already have in the economy and grow new capacity where that's needed in order to make sure that can happen. We have a number of other measures in terms of trying to encourage more use of local and seasonal foods, as well as trying to reduce the carbon footprint of our food chain in Scotland. And clearly that's something I know that the member has welcomed in the past. So hopefully the ability to be able to do things like that, try and have a more circular economy, reduce our dependence on imported products in terms of food, and make more use of the wonderful food we have in Scotland. And Food and Drink Fortnight is an appropriate time to raise that point. We will hopefully move to a position where we can minimise the amount of imported material which is from more carbon-intensive sources.
And briefly, Alex Johnston.
Can I ask the Minister what steps the Government is taking to increase Scotland's onshore gas production and remind him that by doing so we could actually reduce our emissions over time, reduce carbon footprint in Scotland and actually reduce the cost of energy to our hard-pressed domestic and business customers?
Minister.
Well, clearly, in terms of energy policy, I probably better leave that to Fergus Ewing, the relevant minister. However, I take the point about trying to minimise the carbon intensity of our energy supply, and clearly that's one of the reasons why the Scottish Government has moved to a decarbonisation target for electricity generation, which I appreciate is a different subject to the one that the member has mentioned, but it's about the overall consumption of electricity and energy in Scotland. We are trying to make a significant step in decarbonising electricity by 2030, and that's something I hope the UK Government takes on board and also makes a similar move in its own targets.
Thank you, Minister. Question number 2, Mike Mackenzie.
To ask the Scottish Government for a response to the recent Bank of Scotland PMI survey.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government welcomes these figures, which are a further sign of continued strengthening in Scotland's economy. August Purchasing Managers Index recorded a record rate of expansion in business activity in Scotland, reporting that private sector output expanded for the 11th consecutive month and at the highest rate in the history of the Purchasing Managers Index. The reported growth was driven by both manufacturing and services, with services in particular growing at its fastest rate in 15 years.
Mike Mackenzie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. There are encouraging figures in this survey which I'm sure should be welcomed by all sides of the chamber. However, they come in the context of the Chancellor boasting that he'll press on with his austerity measures, which have taken the UK through the worst recession in living memory. Tomorrow, the Scottish Government will publish its draft budget for the coming year. Does the Cabinet Secretary not agree that whatever measures it contains to support economic recovery and employment Scotland remains hampered by the decisions being made for it at Westminster.
Cabinet Secretary.
President Officer, I've made no secret of the fact that I disagree with a fundamental decision taken by the Chancellor in his management of the economy since 2010, and that has been the decision to reduce our capital budget first by 33%, albeit that that's been tempered to a reduction of 26%. I think that was the wrong step to take, and as a consequence, it has constrained the ability of the Scottish economy to recover. The fact that we are now seeing the very strong and sustained levels of business confidence within the economy is very encouraging. I welcome that. I think it's an indication which is essential of private sector commitment to work with the government to grow the economy, and that will remain at the heart of the government's response to the challenges that we face.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. Contrary to the carping we've heard from Mr Mackenzie, don't these encouraging figures show that there is in fact no conflict between a policy of austerity and delivering economic growth? And we're looking forward to seeing greater economic growth as we go forward.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, can I welcome Mr Fraser to his post on behalf of the Conservative Party in dealing with enterprise and energy issues. And can I just say that I do fundamentally disagree with him on the point about the impact of austerity on the economy. I readily support the necessity of ensuring that the public finances are restored to balance. What I don't understand is why the Chancellor has had to borrow in excess of £250 billion more than he planned to borrow to deal with austerity, because his policies failed to deliver the level of growth that the Chancellor and the OBR themselves predicted would be delivered. I would have thought a better strategy would have been to have borrowed to invest in the economy, to generate the tax revenues that would come from keeping people in employment, and that would have given us an earlier exit from recession than we have managed to secure on behalf of the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes topical questions, and we now move to the next item of business this afternoon, which is a debate on motion number 7622 in the name of Fiona Hislop on Scotland's historic environment. The way forward. I'll allow a few seconds for members to change seats.